Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times when I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
Achieving a gorgeous grin from home isn't a total mystery with Bite Clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all of your sleuthing friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Content warning. This episode contains discussion of murder.
It's fair to say that attorney James Brosnahan has just about done it all. He's tackled murder cases as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. He's had years and years of criminal and civil trial experience. He's argued before the United States Supreme Court and even testified in the confirmation hearing of a controversial Chief Justice. He's also traveled to Northern Ireland to investigate the assassinations of two prominent attorneys.
And Brosnahan covers all of this and a lot more in his new book, Justice at Trial, Courtroom Battles and Groundbreaking Cases. We cannot recommend it enough. It's a great read about his storied career, with plenty of excellent insights for current or prospective attorneys, as well as any member of the public fascinated with our legal system and true crime cases.
In our interview, Brosnahan talked with us about murders, courtroom twists, his run-ins with prominent attorneys and politicians, and why society desperately needs good lawyers more than ever. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is a conversation with attorney and Justice at Trial author James Brosnahan.
I really enjoy memoirs by trial lawyers, books like My Life in Court by Louis Nizer, or
I love that book.
An incredible book.
I love that book, and I read it to try to, understand, because I was just starting. And he had an argument, something about octopuses. And I was at that time living in Arizona, and I tried about 5 cases where I argued something about an octopus when you think I'm on the desert, right?
Yeah.
So, but that book was wonderful. That was great.
And I enjoyed this book just as much because it's full of stories. It's you've had a fascinating life. It's full of insights. There's nothing more fun than this is like the literary equivalent of sitting down and hearing somebody who's done it all just tell one incredible story after another.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I had fun most days. Some days not so much, but most days I did. I wanted the reader to enjoy the book, I think, but I wanted to enjoy it in that they would feel like they were right inside the courtroom and things are happening and what's going to be the result and see what people do. I was told when I started very very valuable information that it's not about you. This person told me it's about the reader. Well, of course I know that because I read as you do.
Yeah, as you can see from our background.
I saw where you got a hold of confidential documents or something, and I saw you. Yeah, that's tricky. That's
Yeah,
tricky.
we're busy.
we stay busy. We're tricky, it's been a ride, but I wanted to ask you, you kind of get into this in the book, but just for our listeners, can you tell us a bit about your background and about how you decided that you wanted to go into law in the first place?
Well, my background was I was a slow starter for medical and other reasons, but once I got going in college, I did very well. I got into college on a basketball scholarship, and otherwise, not sure I would have gone to college. But my father and I were watching the Army McCarthy hearings, and that name is probably not known to too many of your listeners, but McCarthy was a communist hunter and he ruined people's lives. And he called out a young lawyer in this older lawyer's kind of stuffy law firm in Boston. And because he was a member of the ACLU. And that meant he was a communist as far as McCarthy was concerned. And this is on national television. And Mr. Welch, the older lawyer, leaned across the table on national television and he said to McCarthy, "Have you no shame?" It was a direct confrontation. It was truth to power. And I thought, that looks like fun. I mean, I'd like to, I'd like to do that. So that's when I started.
And then your very first case was a murder case. That's kind of like
Well,
started.
yeah, I did that in honor of the name of your program. Yeah, yeah. I want to be a trial lawyer, right?
Yeah.
And so I got very lucky and became a federal prosecutor on a Monday, and never having tried a case. And on Tuesday, the boss came in. We only had 5 people in the office. 2 were civil, and a couple of us were going to try the criminal cases. And he said, "There's a criminal case on Monday. Will you try it?" Well, of course, I said, "Yeah." So he left the file. I opened it up, and it was a first-degree murder case with allegations of the death penalty, which I always opposed. I didn't like the death penalty. And so I had whatever that is, 6 days to get ready. And I did. I worked 12, 14 hours a day. But there was a senior person who took me out drinking every night. Martinis was our favorite. And he told me where you're supposed to stand in the courtroom and you're supposed to take notes and you don't fight with the judge and the very basic stuff. And the murder, because I know of your great interest in this, was a stabbing death by 2 defendants on the Pima Reservation south of Phoenix. We had moved from Boston to Phoenix. And they stabbed him to death. There was some kind of fight that went on. The victim's car overturned. And so they ran up to it and they stabbed him and stabbed him and stabbed him. It was an awful thing. So there I am waiting for the jury as in the preface of my book. And in one corner, we have the victim's family, and in the other corner, we have the defendant's family. And I'm overcome by the power that I have because I decided not to ask for the death penalty. But when that was over, we did get convictions because, they did it. That's always good for the prosecution. And there were witnesses and so forth. I loved it. It was like being in theater. It was so exciting, and you didn't know what was going to happen. I certainly didn't know what was going to happen. That's the moment when I realized law school hadn't prepared me at all for the practice of law. It's a little different now because they have programs, and you learn a little bit about trial, and if you're interested in that and all that. But that was my first trial, and it was as exciting as it could be.
Yeah, you mentioned it involved Native Americans, and I believe you talk in the book about how some of the prospective jurors had some prejudices or biases against Native
Some did. Yeah, some did. Not everybody in Phoenix was prejudiced against Native Americans by any means, but some people really were, and they were outspoken about it. They didn't hide it. And by that time, in my law practice, I had spent a lot of time on the Navajo reservation, which I found fascinating and completely different from the movies I had seen before I went out west. And I worked with detectives on the Navajo police force and spent a lot of time going to scenes out there and absorbing the beauties of the Navajo reservation, and with a growing respect for the members of the Navajo Nation. So there was Alice Cody minding her own business on a Saturday, 14 years old, in her tent, taking care of her brother Danny and her sister Melinda, while her parents were tending the sheep. They were just off Route 89. And Lester Buatti, a white man, was trying to bum a ride. If he had bummed a ride successfully, Alice Cody might be 72 years old today. But that's not what happened. And Buatti, at some deadly instinct, saw the tent, went over there, asked for water. Danny gave him some water. And then he put his hand on Alice's hip, 14 years old. And Danny tried to defend her, but he was small for his age. So suddenly, Buatti pulled a .22 pistol and shot Alice dead. And he then turned the gun on Danny, put it at the bridge of Danny's nose, and fired the .22 pistol. The bullet went into Danny's head, but he survived. And tell the story of the trial in Phoenix, where the surviving Codys came. It's the first time they'd ever been in an elevator. They came from a different world, but they understood what was going on. And Danny took the stand and looked out. You could only see his head and his shoulders. He was not a big kid. And he identified Lester Buatti and tells the story of the trial. And Buatti's defense of mental illness, which is, as you well know, very important in murder cases. Very often it comes up. Sometimes it's justified, but...
Yeah, and you got a chance to cross-examine him. Can you tell us about your cross-examination of this man? It was a memorable moment in the book, one of many.
Well, it was. And as I explain, it's one of the things I love about trial. You can prepare, the antitrust trial for 2 years, and you got it all figured out, and then your witness dies, and you don't know what's going to happen. And so I made a decision on the spur of the moment. I thought that Buatti remembered. He was claiming he had temporary loss of memory. He just couldn't remember any of it. I didn't believe him for a minute. And so I decided to confront him. And I did in a way that federal courts wouldn't allow today, but I went right up and stood behind him. And I started questioning him very loud, pretty loudly, that you not only remember it, you know what you did. And he was kind of shaken by it. And the jury they leaned forward. When a jury leans forward, that's a good thing for you. Okay. It isn't that their back hurts. All right. It's they don't want to miss a word. And the high point can come if the clerk, who's always busy with the papers, if the clerk pays attention to you're really flying high there. So that's what happened. I confronted him and detailed what you did. You went in, you had a pistol. You had a .22 pistol. You remember that. And you pulled it out. It's over. You get the idea. And that was part of the trial. There were expert psychiatrists and so forth. And it was very interesting.
And what was the verdict in that case?
The verdict was guilty. That was the right verdict. I did something a little out there, and that is one of the bailiffs, one of the marshals told me that over in the jail at night, Buatti was a totally different person. He was talking to the guards and so forth. But in the courtroom, he bent over, he stared at the floor, he didn't pay any attention, like he's crazy. So I set up a hidden video, and took video of him talking to people and acting fine, and the judge let me play it. And I'll tell you, when that video was over, the jury they just turned and looked at him like, if you're defending, you don't want that. So that was one of the things that happened.
There's nothing worse than getting home from your trip only to find you missed a can't-miss travel experience. That's why you need Viator. Book guided tours, excursions, and more in one place to make your trip truly unregrettable. There are over 300,000 travel experiences to choose from, so you can find something for everyone. And Viator offers free cancellation and 24/7 customer service, so you always have support around the clock. Download the Viator app now to use code Viator10 for 10% off your first booking in the app. Regret less. Do more with Viator.
In the book, you quote from the movie The Sting when Paul Newman says, "We need to do things on the fly." And in your chapter on your defense of Patty, you note that there is no trial lawyer's playbook. So can you kind of speak to the improvisation that comes with this work?
Well, yes, but you better be right. I was lecturing on Friday, for example, to lawyers. I told them, there are no rules. There's procedural rules, ethical rules, and those kind of rules, but there's no rules on how you try a case. There's only situations. And I had a case where the 17th most powerful woman in business was indicted. She was the chairperson of Hewlett-Packard, which is a huge corporation. And a man, an older man, had on the board, had taken out after her and really caused her to be a national negative sensation on a privacy issue. And so what to do? And she was on the cover of Time magazine, which is, you don't want to be, that kind of woman of the year. That is not a good thing. And it was a terrible picture of her and all that. And so what should you do? 3 days after she was indicted, I told her she should do it, and she agreed because of her talents. She's a very nice person, but she was also suffering from stage 4 cancer. And she never complained about it. I never heard her complain about anything. We put her on 60 Minutes in front of 14 million people. And she handled herself very well. She explained what really happened. And about 5 days later, she had been selected as Businesswoman of the Year in the Bay Area. And she said, "No, you shouldn't give it to me. I'm indicted." No, they insisted. And right after 60 Minutes, a lot of people had seen it. There were 500 people in the room, and they called her name. The governor was there, and they called her name. She got a standing ovation. San Franciscans back up their own people. And it turned out that was the turning point in the case for her, and the rest of the story's in the book. You got to buy the book.
It's a great book.
Yes. If you know a lawyer, if you just want to read about really great, interesting legal stories.
Speaking of San Francisco, speaking of lawyers, San Francisco in the 60s had some great ones. Like
yes.
Yes. Can you tell us about those guys and what you could learn?
Well, they were the real deal. Ehrlich wrote the best book on cross-examination I ever read, because he had his cross-examinations in there, and he had some wonderful cases. Belli was the one who brought visuals into the courtroom much more than they had been before. And if you think back to the 50s, when Belli was really at his prime, the nation was watching television all the time. Everything became visual. So Belli was great that way. I knew both of them. And see, that's what I had the benefit of. Because if I tried a case against somebody, there was a point there where I had 2 cases a year against Belli. I don't know why, but I did. But I was learning from them, just the way they handle themselves. It's interesting, the way they dressed. This is before television advertising for lawyers, right? And they would dress a certain way. When they walked into a room, everybody would be tempted to say, "Who is that? Who is that?" That's how you got business. And those 2 especially were great, but there were many more that you might or might not have heard of. James Martin McGinnis, I tried cases against him, with him. Just George Davis ran a string of, you'll appreciate this, 18 successful murder defenses. It was pretty good. Yeah. And they all wrote books, by the way. And I did think, maybe someday I'll have the time to write a book, and I did.
Good for you. That's awesome. I wanted to ask you, at some point you switched, you shifted from prosecution to the defense. Was that transition difficult at all?
Not at all. I was always going to do that. I wrote my paper in law school on Clarence Darrow, who your readers might not know. I've got him as #1 American criminal defense lawyer of all time. Tried 101 murder cases and only lost 1. And that one, the defendant was a lawyer. So you can't, really. But, people but it would be interesting for them to know what courtrooms are all about. All of the unresolved problems that are out there that society hasn't solved, that individuals haven't solved, that children haven't been able to solve, they pour into the courts all over the country every day. Today, there were cases. My wife's a lawyer, and then was a judge for 40 years. My daughter's a judge in Minnesota, and they can tell you the stories that are there. The child custody, who gets the child? Wow. So, and I've done some of that. People ask me, what's the most difficult case you ever had for For a long time, I said it was a child custody case. I represented the mother and the poor kid. So all that activity is in the courts, and all of America's problems, one way or the other, find their way in there. And then the question is, on the criminal side, the one that fascinates me is why do lawyers do what they do? They could do something much easier. They could do wills or estate planning. They don't have to stand next to some despised person, but they do it. And I did it. I don't have I do have one man accused of making bombs in his house in San Francisco, and there was probably my most famous case is not in the book at the request of the client, which I certainly honored. But I do have a discussion of what it's like to represent someone accused of terrorism, with the threats and the challenges, all that the lawyers go through. What's that like? It's not easy.
Yeah, your book really paints an incredible picture of all of the challenges it faces to do this kind of work. And at one point, there was a line that kind of jumped out at me. You said, controlling one's temper in the face of bullying is often essential. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that and how that idea has come into play in your legal work.
Well, yeah, I worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco after we moved there, and we've been in San Francisco 61 years. And he was very good at controlling his temper. And I watched him a lot. I knew I could learn a lot from him. He was very good at dealing with his own power. He had it under control. He had it subject to his analysis. What's happening now? Where are we now? And I watched him. I have had a temper a time or two, but, these screamers that go to depositions now and yell at everybody, usually they're nervous because they haven't tried a case, Really? The ones you have to worry about are the ones that, hi, how are you? How's it going? Oh boy. But I have had Brosnahan moments, my partners call them. And then, because I'll take some guff from somebody and go on about my business, and I'll take a second one and I go on about my business. And then on the third one, because I can put words together. I can put words together that hurt. I know how to do it. And then I get real quiet and I just tell them what we're going to do. And one prosecutor gave me a lot of guff one day, and I said, look, let's get off on the right foot. You talk to me with respect or don't talk to me at all. And that did it. That did it. So occasionally you have to stick up for yourself.
You mentioned, obviously, we have a particular interest in murder cases. As journalists, we're also interested in First Amendment cases.
Oh, yeah.
It's about the zebra murders.
Oh, yes. The zebra murders, people have forgotten, fortunately, what it was like, but there was nobody downtown in San Francisco because the zebra murderers were killing white people at random. You never quite knew where it would strike and what would happen. And the judge, my little part, I had a cameo part in it, but it was on the First Amendment because the Chronicle, which I represented, came into possession of more data as to what had really happened while the case was pending against these defendants. They were found and they were arrested. And she had a broad order forbidding the Chronicle from taking the information they had in their possession and printing it. So I argued, I think correctly, under the First Amendment, that once you have the information, you have a right to publish it. And there's important cases. There was a New York Times case in the U.S. Supreme Court on the question of once you have it, then you have a right to publish it. She agreed, and they were then able to publish it. But for many years, I had I loved the First Amendment practice. And I tried First Amendment cases of various kinds, a couple of which are in the book. And I argued one in the Supreme Court that had part of it as freedom of speech and right of assembly. And I just love that kind of work. I wrote on it and I lectured on it. I loved it.
It's incredibly important work. We're dealing with a case right now with a gag order, and at times it's been difficult to get some information. But one thing we were curious about, just in terms of another homicide case that you were on, is the Manly Socrates case. I hope I'm saying his name right.
Yeah.
That was heartbreaking what he went through. And I was just curious, how did Lisa Starr, the founder of the California Innocence Project, convince you to take on that case?
Well, you don't know me very well. Actually, as a digression, somebody said, "How can we get you to speak?" I said, "You can ask me." It was like a 5-minute call. Will you do it? And I don't think I think in the 60 years, I turned down one case because I was in trial and I had committed to do another trial. And so my partner, Bill Alsop, took the case. It was only 9 days to go. There was no way I could do it. So, but it stands up because that's the only one I ever turned down. And that man is the Innocence Project had worked on his case for 10 years. And they can't work on every case, where people write them. But they were convinced that he did not do an arson murder that killed a mother and 2 children. And the high point of that case, I think, and this is an example of what we lawyers get to witness, the courage of people. He is definitely the hero of that chapter in my book, no question. And the prosecutor was going to retry the murder case. We were getting ready for murder and so forth. And then one day, you can always tell when they're getting a little squeamish about it because all of a sudden they're nice to you. The whole atmosphere changed. How are you? How's it going? How are those warriors? They were great. Did you see them last night? Oh, please. And so we went back and forth. And finally, he said, look, he's been in jail 17 years. And I'm telling your audience, for a crime he didn't commit. In fact, he not only didn't commit the arson, but the best science was, which we had, it wasn't arson at all. And he had been in jail in these chains. Every time I saw him, he had the chains on that made noise when he walked for 17 years. And his sister believed in him. So the prosecutor said, I let him out of jail today if he would just admit that he did the arson. I said, I don't think he'll go for it, but I have to tell him. So I went back to the county jail where he was, and I told him, I said, they'll let you out today if you just admit that you did the arson. And the quote is in the book. It's one of the amazing things that I heard over the years. He said, I will either be acquitted in this trial or I will die in jail. And I went back and told the prosecutor, and they let him out. The day he appears on the other side of the glass in his civilian clothes for the first time in 17 years. And his sister was there and his two sons. And he came out through the door and he was hugging everybody. He shook my hand. He said, "You did it." I said, "No, you did it." And he went home to Los Angeles. These are the things we experience. They're not all happy like that. But the experiences of a lawyer who does all kinds of cases, it makes a good life for young people. I hope some young law students and so forth get this book.
Yeah, it is a great read for everybody, but especially people who are thinking about pursuing a career in law, I would say.
Yeah.
Law students.
I think it tells that kind of story that they might be interested.
Yeah, and you've just done so many types of cases and types of law over time. I think that's really remarkable in terms of getting to experience some of these, frankly, historic moments. I mean, one moment that jumps out at me is that the future president of the United States looked at you and told you that you had hurt your legal career by testifying against Chief Justice Rehnquist.
Briefly, I testified against him that he was challenging voters. He wasn't necessarily challenging, but he was overseeing the challenge of voters in a Democratic precinct, mostly Black Americans and Hispanic people. And I was the prosecutor in charge of complaints that day, and I went down there. There he was. And that was fine. And years passed. And they asked me, when he was up for Chief Justice, they said, "Will you testify?" And after thinking about it, and talking to my partners, there goes Brosnahan again in this 1,000-lawyer law firm. He's going to testify against the Chief Justice. And I'm sure they were muttering, he'd testify against the Pope, if he could do it, So I go back and they grill me for 2 hours, and I enjoyed the 2 hours. The Democrats wanted me to add stuff and all this kind of thing, and Biden was the chair. And on the point that you mentioned, with the cameras rolling, Biden says, "Don't you think you've hurt your career?" And I said, "Well, I hope not." And it didn't hurt me at all, as far as I know. But then I got another. This is in the book. I got another case in the Supreme Court for the political parties in California. Those were my clients. So I went back and I walk in to the Supreme Court chamber, and there's the chief sitting in the center seat. And what happened in that case is in the book.
Yeah, it's a great moment, and just a fascinating, look at your history as a lawyer. I wanted to go back a little bit on some trial strategy, and it was just a kind of advice you give to your clients that really stuck out to me, that, when they're saying that everyone is against them, you indicate that you're maybe looking to cast one or two evil witnesses at most.
The phrase I got to use, and I kept using it over and over again, is we're only auditioning for one really bad person. Okay, I know the world is against you, and I know the whole corporation is against you and all this stuff. But look, tell me who's the real person behind all this, and we'll do what we can to show what they're doing and what they did. Yeah, we're only auditioning for one bad person.
I think I want to jump into some of our questions about Ireland, Kevin, if you don't mind, unless you have anything else, because my family's Irish as well. My grandparents emigrated over, so I was really, really riveted by some of your work in Northern Ireland in those cases.
Yeah.
And I guess to start off with, can you just tell us a bit about, you were reading all these different Irish barristers, and of course, long tradition of high power Irish barristers, including, some of, Wolfe Tone was a barrister, right? And Pierce tried one case and then gave up, but, that's all right. But tell us maybe from the beginning, when you were a young lawyer, reading about some of those cases.
I read a lot of books about trial lawyers. My library's right here to my right, and it's filled with biographies of trial lawyers and judges. And my wife has helped me collect what is really a wonderful library of that. And I read a lot of those books because I was trying to figure out what should a trial lawyer be doing and how should they do it? And you might be surprised at how helpful English stories about English barristers and Irish barristers are, because there's so much that travels generations in how you confront a witness and how you question somebody and all of that. So I learned a lot about that. There's another thing too, though, and that is 6 out of 8 of my great grandparents came over in the hunger boats, and they carried whatever they could carry. My great grandmother, Catherine Larkin, was about 9 years old, and a lot of people didn't survive on those boats. So I've always been fascinated by Irish stuff, and I had a chance to go investigate 2 murders in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Actually, there's a person who was not in the book for a very good reason, and that, if I ever get a chance, I'd write a book about that. This one was, I was asked by a civil rights group in New York City. They called up and they said, "We understand you investigated murder in Northern Ireland," which was true, I had. And they said, "We're going over and we're going to investigate the murder of 2 lawyers who were killed about 10 years apart, just for who they represented." They were not part of the IRA, they were lawyers. And I said, "Sure." And so we went over and we investigated. We confronted the chief of police, as we would call him, the head of the constabulary. That was the most fun, because we just confronted the hell out of him, like we were somebody. Which, who's this guy from San Francisco confronting this guy? But one of the cases we quote solved, because Patrick Finucane was one of the great lawyers in Northern Ireland. He had taken cases to the International Court, and he had won a number of them, embarrassing the British government. He represented Bobby Sands, who, for your audience, became the emblem of resistance in Northern Ireland, went on a hunger strike, and died. Nice man. His background was he used to work in a garage until he was 15, and then the Protestants made him leave. They just threatened him, and he had to leave his job, and he joined the IRA. Patrick Finucane was sitting at home one Sunday night when 2 men entered with guns and shot him in front of his wife. She was wounded, and the kids. And he was dead. So that was one of them. And Rosemary Nelson was the other one. She was part of a new wave of women flooding in quite a while ago, flooding into the legal profession. And by the way, the funny scene in the Bar Association when there was a movement to investigate her death. And suddenly the old men were in this group, and the room was filled with women, and they were just unsettled by this development. Who are all these women? So, but one of the people that we interviewed told us he had given the guns to the murderers of Patrick Finucane, and he gave us their names. Now, why would he do that? He did it because he was hoping that giving the names to 2 Americans would somehow protect him. So I came home to San Francisco and I wrote the Attorney General of England. And I said, we have the names. Let me know what you want me to do with them. Never heard of a word. Yeah. Then I said the same thing to Northern Ireland. Never heard a word. And this man, the witness who told us what he had done by way of giving the guns, walked out of his house one day and was shot dead. Then it came out how long the police had known exactly the names that we had. The police had those names. In fact, they had a recorded confession that they lost the tape of. Oh, yeah. So it was a cover-up of police, and the bottom line in the Troubles in Northern Ireland was society can completely unravel. It can happen. And it did happen there for 25 years. And we walked around when Northern Ireland and learned a lot about what it must have been like, 200 years ago. What was it like to be a Brosnahan or Kavanaugh or any of the other people that I'm descended from? It was total discrimination for pretty much Henry II in the year 1173 was kind of the beginning of it. And it just got worse and worse.
Yes, absolutely. One of my ancestors is actually canonized, and he was hunted down by the British and then drawn and quartered. If you ever go to the cathedral in Drogheda, his head is there.
Oh!
Oliver Plunkett.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
So
you're a Plunkett?
Yeah, my grandmother's mother was a Plunkett. So they were Plunkett. So I always get excited because I love Irish history. I think it's fascinating. But
yeah, your listeners won't care about this at all. But I spent 5 hours in Galway in a bookstore checking all the indexes of all the books on Irish history, looking for Brosnahan, B-R-O-S, 0. And for all those years, and I kept looking, I couldn't find that Brosnahan did anything to resist anybody. I think we were outside the castle in some kind of little cottage or something. And then a friend of mine this summer was driving through a town called Castle Island. And they have a lot of Brosnahans there because there's a town called Brosna, which is up the hill and very remote. There's only 40 houses there. There's one church and 40 houses. And so on a whim, they drove up there and they found a plaque. And she took a picture of it and sent it to me. And it says, in 1920, the Brosna Brigade resisted the British in the Battle of whatever. And so that's the only, I don't pluck it. Oh my God.
Bit of celebrity, obviously. No, that's so cool though. I love that. The Brosna Brigade. You guys gotta make some merch on that or something. My only other cool story with this is my grandfather who was from Dublin. Their family, his parents, my great grandparents, Michael Collins would apparently be like sneaking through their property to kind of cross the river and then go back across. There was a lot of espionage in those days because obviously he was a wanted man. But that is so cool. Maybe a Brosnahan wasn't in the books at that point, but I'm sure you will be for the work you did on these two important cases up in the north. Because
I don't know, but the Irish Echo wrote a very nice story. I don't know if you've seen that, but
yes.
And my daughter is a member in Minneapolis, of a group that plays Irish music, and somehow one of them got a hold of the Irish Echo Review, which is nice. And so they bought the book and declared it okay, and the Irish are now the silent majority. There's about something like 33 million, maybe, that claim some Irish background. It's a huge number.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Kevin was adopted, but we did the genealogy test, and he's Irish too. So it's just, we're everywhere. Yeah, no, it's interesting. My uncle was an immigration lawyer, and so he worked on, I think it was the Brian Pearson case in New York when they were trying to deport an IRA member from America. And
I know the case very well. I won't go into it, but I had such a case that had a very good result. And it took 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a long time. But yeah, no, I mean, it was fascinating to read this part of the book, because you're going into Northern Ireland as an American, but as an Irish American, and you're able to see some of this discrimination. You mentioned kind of understanding what it might be like hundreds of years ago to see that.
Yeah, I mean, they were still marching through Catholic neighborhoods. The Protestants were marching through Catholic neighborhoods to show their domination. The Ford Motor Company had one Catholic employee in their factory, one Catholic. Ford, of course, was Catholic himself, the grandfather, I guess. But the discrimination, the government jobs were all held by Protestants, about 94%. When I first went there, I was there in the 90s. The middle 90s, I think, was my first trip. And it would be, in California, it would be, all the Protestants would live in Hayward, and all the Catholics would live in San Jose. And the need for caution in the middle of the Troubles was excessive. The hotel I stayed in was bombed 31 times. Yeah, and life went on. I went to the symphony one night, and they have a wonderful symphony in Northern Ireland, and there were the people, and they were all dressed up, and they're trying to live some kind of life in the middle of complete chaos.
And what you said so eloquently in the book is just, the fact, what it says about society can collapse. And it's a horrifying, those two stories, those two murders are so horrifying, because you have people who are lawyers who are trying to do the right thing, fight for civil rights, and just follow the law. And
that was our message. And we said that to a number of people in authority over there, because we met a lot of people. These were 12-hour days, and you don't kill the lawyers. People will care about it if you kill the lawyers, and we care about it. We're over here. One man was close to Rosemary Nelson, and he said, "Please do what you can." And we did some things in the United States with Congress and other things. We did what we could, not to exaggerate, but we did what we could. And so I think I'm becoming more Irish by the year.
One of the tragic elements of it is, despite all the work you did, and the Finucane case was somewhat solved. There was some conclusion there, but with the Nelson case, it really isn't. And what's horrifying is the amount of, as we were talking about society breaking down, and you actually have people in law enforcement who are supposed to be enforcing laws and protecting people, where it's kind of bleeding into, sectarian violence with state actors being involved, and that's still unsolved.
Well, we were satisfied after our investigation that there were, at different levels of the police force, direct involvement by them. Interestingly enough, in the last couple of years, there have been a few cases of sort of semi-insurrection in the United States that involved one or two policemen. And I noticed that particularly because of my Irish experience with the cops who were putting what they would do, they would have their criminal file on X and they would post it on a fence. And what that meant was go kill them. There's all kinds of ways to be bad. And that was done. So I got to see it all. I'm back at the theme that lawyering is an interesting life. I mean, you come home. I was so glad. I put this in the book too. Flying out of Northern Ireland and getting back on, in Berkeley and with our social assumptions that we have. It's really made me feel good.
Yeah, I in the kind of the end of your book, you talk a bit about, lawyers, trial lawyers, but, lawyers in general can be the last defense from tyranny, outright tyranny. And I know that's something you say a lot. He often says that because you're a lawyer.
Well, it's happening right now. There's lawyers fighting censorship. There's lawyers fighting on the abortion issue. There's lawyers. You name any issue in the country, and there are lawyers fighting it. And some of them, and you know this, some of them are full-time, dedicated, pro bono, low-income people, lawyers who devote their entire lives to things like the rights of the handicapped. I know someone who gave his whole career was devoted to the handicapped. Now, if they're not going to do it, who's going to do it exactly? Congress going to do it? Are you waiting for Congress to get together and be helpful? They have over the years to some extent. They have passed some statutes, but the lawyers are in a lot of ways, in my book, that lawyers are heroes. There's an awful lot of heroes. And if you want to be a hero and you're a kid, think about it.
What would your advice be for a young person today who wants to become a lawyer?
Two things. Practice your speech and practice your writing. And even if you're good at both of those now, set a goal to make yourself better. It's the speech and the writing. Those are the skills you have to have. And on the writing, I do a lot of teaching on speaking, and there's an awful lot to it. There's a great, get your voice so that people will listen to you. And if you speak too fast, practice, get it slowly, get it under control, and emphasis and clarity. These are things that you can practice, but they're hard because you have a habit of speaking, and that habit starts with your parents and all the way through, and you have a certain way. It's not easy to change it, but you can record yourself, listen to it. So anyway, you see what happens when I get started on this.
No, I love it. They can start a podcast and replay what they're saying and see how it sounds.
Yeah.
A lot of
I did an example the other day. I was just going to tell you on LinkedIn, and I was trying to give a demonstration of exactly how to do it. And I had emphasis, and it was about a murder case, and I was doing all this. I had two ums in there. And that, you want to get away from that. And your favorite thing is maybe, do you know? It doesn't add anything to the sentence, right? What is that? But it's a habit. So you got to work on it.
The thing I'm working on right now is basically, I say that way too much. So yeah, there's always still
basically. Yeah. You know what helps is the writing, because if you write it in like my book and you edit it, when you say basically you take it out right away.
Toss it out.
A lot of lawyers tend to specialize in just one or two areas. I guess, why didn't you do that? Why do you think you practiced in so many different areas? And
so many fascinating cases.
Yeah.
I think curiosity is important. And I thought it would keep me going, which I wanted to do. I think, as I say, I was inspired. You mentioned Jake Ehrlich and Melvin Belli. They got to a point where they would take any kind of case. And Belli struck out when he represented Jack Ruby down in Texas, who had shot the murderer of JFK. And he lost that case. I don't think he had to lose it, actually, if he played it right. So it isn't that easy, actually, but you have to work harder, because you might be, as I was with some frequency, against a specialist who knows all the cases and what the next case might be in the Ninth Circuit and all that. You have to work a little harder. It's a good question. I think part of it was I always wanted trials, and even in the early days, there were some antitrust lawyers, for example, they did have trials, but they didn't have a trial after trial after trial, which is what I wanted. My goal was to try as many cases as I could. So that means that if I go into this area, like I tried 7 admiralty cases, okay? I didn't put that in the book, mercifully. And then the waves came and the boat rocked, and who knows. But I did, and by the way, I found an advantage that if you do civil and criminal cases, there's a transference of information from one to the other. I was talking Friday with the civil lawyers about going to the scene, and my observation is that criminal lawyers always go to the scene. The civil lawyers might go if it's an auto accident, but some of the commercial lawyers sometimes don't think about going to the scene. The hotel room where they fix the prices. If it's my case, I go and measure the couch, the chair, how well can you hear? What are the acoustics like? I mean, and so there's transference from one to the other.
Absolutely. I guess where can people get your book?
The easiest place is to order it at Barnes & Noble, on Amazon, and that's really the easiest place to get it. Because if I'm speaking, and I'm doing a lot of that, we have the books for sale there. So that's the easiest way to get it, and it comes in about 6-7 days, and people are doing that. I'm running into people. We went to a nice dinner on Friday night, and there were people there who had bought the book and all that. So that was fine.
Very cool, and we would strongly recommend it. Is there anything we didn't ask you about that you wanted to mention about the book, about any of the stories or themes we've been talking about?
You didn't ask me about promising my fellow students in law school that if we hired the cook, which we were going to do, we wouldn't try to date the cook. And law students talk in very formal ways sometimes. And so we solemnly said to each other, we just won't date the cook. And Carol and I got engaged 3 weeks later. And, it's quite a story, and it's in there in the book. And we got married 3 weeks after that. Carol's Jewish, I'm Irish. It was 1958. Oh, my. We violated tribal custom. Oh, my. So we came out, yeah, really. And we came out west. And that was good.
It's a nice love story within a lot of different legal stories.
65 years on the 8th of November.
Wow. Congratulations.
For three children, 4 grandchildren, and a great-grandchild due in March.
Oh, that's exciting.
So there. So to all the objectors back in the day, I don't want to descend to the 3rd grade, but I don't know who we offended by that story, but that's your problem.
Yeah, that's our problem. No.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Oh man. Well, this has been so delightful. Thank you so much for
it's been fun. Yeah, thank you. I really admire your work in a lot of different ways. Yeah, it's great.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot.
I really enjoyed it, and thank you. You got a very nice way to present things. Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And yeah, just if you ever write that book on that other Irish case, please let us know, because we'd love to.
I will. I will. I'd love to do that.
Thanks so much to Jim. We really enjoyed speaking with him. By Justice at Trial. It's a gripping read. Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
With the Planet Fitness Black Card, you don't just get a great workout, you get a great perk out, because your membership is packed with perks. For zero enrollment and $24.99 a month, you'll get perks like access to any of our 2,400 clean and spacious locations. Bring a friend anytime and both work out, with tons of equipment that'll give you that big fitness energy. Relax in the Black Card spa and more. Work out and perk out with the PF Black Card. Join today for zero enrollment and $24.99 a month. See Home Club for details.